Hey, what's going on YouTube? Marine X back at it again. Why you should carry a revolver for your everyday carry, your CCW. I'm going to go all in and why I like to have a revolver for my everyday carry versus semi-automatic. We'll probably do a video about semi-automatics, but I'm going to tell you why I feel most comfortable with revolvers overall. First off, there are double action, single action, and single action revolvers. You can normally get them on a 5, 6, all the way up to like an 8-shot revolver for the cylinder itself. All sorts of use cases. A lot of times, commonly, you will see being carried for an actual revolver is a 2-inch barrel, but you can some folks you might see go up to like a 6-inch barrel or something like that. It really just depends on what you're most comfortable with. Now, there's a lot of reasons why you may want to run a revolver for your everyday carry. First off, they normally can have a larger caliber of round that can go inside of them. Commonly, you see 357 Magnums, but you can run a 38 through those as well. The ammo is normally cheap, and as long as it's good ammo, you can almost run anything through them. They have very low likelihood of malfunctioning, not no likelihood. If you comment down below that they will never malfunction, that just means you never run rounds through your revolver. But let's talk about when they malfunction and how they could. So whenever you're unloading or you push to go actually to dump all the rounds that have been spent, the shells that have been spent through a revolver itself, if you don't completely clear this out. So on the face of the cylinder, if you don't constantly are doing maintenance on this, making sure that you are looking to clean down gunpowder, dirt, mud, or whatever, the face of the cylinder can be clogged up, and that can cause the cylinder not to spin correctly. So that's something that you want to think about. And as you go to eject spent rounds, as you go to eject those, if you don't fully seat that back, and you try to go back and put the actual cylinder back into the weapon itself near the slide, that can make the weapon malfunction. Then there's user malfunctioning for a revolver. So as I mentioned, this is a double action. There's double action, single action, where you see an actual hammer that you can pull back. And then there's single action, which we'll talk about that later in the video. But a lot of use cases for folks improperly using a revolver is what causes a malfunction, which is super rare. But when it comes to a revolver, you have to fully pull back on the trigger itself, and it needs to fully reset before you can send another round down the slide through the chamber in downrange. Unlike a semi-automatic where you can sometimes ride the trigger and go back and ride the trigger and go back and not fully seat it back. If you do that in especially a double action only or a double action, single action that's in double action mode, the cylinder may not fully rotate and you may actually skip some rounds, or you may not seat a round and it may not fire. So you may have a 5 round that you only shoot 3, or you may have an 8 round, you only shoot 4, whatever. So that's one issue that you may have. And as I mentioned before, not properly doing maintenance on these. After you've run about 200, 400 rounds through your weapon, you should be doing maintenance. You should be looking to clean these things off, because the biggest issue you will have is the face of the cylinder, and it can slow down the cylinder itself. Adverse conditions can malfunction these things: mud, sand, maybe not so much like sweat, water, or blood, but mud and sand absolutely can cause a malfunction when it comes to a revolver. So the reason I prefer to carry a double action and not a double action single action is because it helps me maintain trigger discipline. It helps me maintain every single time I pull it back to fully seat the trigger and pull it all the way back and not ride the trigger like you may do whenever you have like a semi-automatic. That's something that I don't normally do whenever I have a double action only. If you have a double action, single action where you can pull the hammer back, the thing that is beneficial for that is if you have a target that's further away and you have a little bit more time to shoot, and you have a little bit of time to aim in, it's beneficial to be able to go single action mode, take a breath, and shoot around. That's actually very beneficial. So I could understand why you might want to get a Ruger, or you may want to get a Smith & Wesson that has an actual hammer so you can go single action. I don't own the old school single action revolvers that you may see from movies like a Colt or whatever. And what you see in those is that every single time you want to shoot the weapon, you have to pull the hammer back. You are the person that is actually making the weapon fire. It's argued to say that, someone that has trained on a single action revolver for, thousands of rounds probably can shoot it faster than someone that has a semi-automatic. At least I've seen it in the movies and I've seen it in real life where they seem to fire fast AF. Double action or semi-automatic, you think you're fast until you go with somebody that has messed around with a single action only revolver. Now, we talked about some use cases about when they malfunction. Now, some things you got to think about when actually carrying a revolver itself and how to properly load it is something you need to think about as well. First off, whenever you want to load a revolver, you need to maintain positive control of the cylinder itself, normally with the left hand, and then you load the actual weapon with the right hand, inputting each round, and then you have positive control of the weapon overall. Once you go in there, you have a relatively easy to use and relatively safe weapon to use, although this one doesn't have a safety. It's safe, like you can still have a user error or you can have a malfunction in a weapon, but I think that this is relatively easier to load and to use in a semi-automatic. But loading is not just the only thing. You also need to make sure you have the correct holster. So here I have a leather holster, which leather holsters are great, especially like the old school looking leather ones when they have the big, you know, the tanned leather and it looks all good. But eventually with the leather holster, you're either gonna have to get it heat treated or some type of treatment because it could become loose and slowly but surely expose the trigger when it comes to a leather holster. I think they look way cooler. I think they look way better, but leather holsters need more maintenance than a Kydex holster. My opinion, if you're going to CCW a revolver, you should get a Kydex holster. Some of them have screws where you can tighten it down. Some of them have ways adjustment points, but whatever you can do to make sure that the trigger's always guarded, less likely you shoot yourself in the penis, less likely you shoot yourself in the leg or the femoral artery or anything like that. Kydex sheaths, I think, are just much more protected. Now, there are more that even do more of a trigger guard sheath or protection. I like this one for the amount that I can get my hand around the grip, but you can get a Kydex holster that even covers more of the trigger. I'm okay with this. It's something to think about is you want to ensure that just because it's a revolver that you're still carrying it correctly, not letting that thing free ball in your pocket, free ball in your bag. Now, one thing that can be argued to say about a revolver is that they typically have more recoil than a semi-automatic because the slide doesn't actuate. I mean, it doesn't actually move when you shoot the weapon. So especially with a revolver that only has a 2-inch barrel, if it had a 6-inch barrel, then it might be a lot easier to control. But if you don't shoot rounds, if you don't put rounds down range with your revolver, you may get a lot of recoil, especially if you never shoot the weapon, and you have to get yourself used to that. This is double action all the time. If you are being very, very pussyfoot with this weapon, you take a shot, there's a likelihood you can slap yourself in the forehead, okay? Maybe not this 38, but if you're shooting a 357 Magnum, 8-round shooter, you never shot it before, if you're out here shooting a 50 or a 454, something crazy, Desert Eagle, yeah, you can bust yourself in the head from the recoil. That is something else you have to think about, is getting yourself used to that through training. So I think it's incredibly important that if you CCW a revolver, you use rubber grips. You may see some grips that look like G10 and they may look super cool and colored or whatever, but the recoil in as your hands sweat, having that amount of grip is extremely important. If it's a home defense revolver, you might get away with not having rubber grips, you know, having a big old monster barrel and all that type of stuff. But if it's a CCW, rubber grips, maybe even taping them, super important to reduce recoil. Now, here are the things that's great about CCW a revolver. There's low impedance when it comes to clothing, low impedance when it comes to grappling. When it comes to an actual revolver itself, there's a high likelihood that if you need to send a round out range while this weapon is still in your pocket, while it is, you know, getting caught on your actual clothing as you're pulling it out, it can be done. There's no slide that's actuating that's in your way. And then in this case, if it's in double action only, even the hammer's not going to get in your way. Now, if you try to run it in single action in your pocket, maybe it can malfunction if the hammer gets caught up on some clothes or something like that, but that's a very low likelihood. So if someone's grappling with you, they grab the slide, you can still shoot the weapon even while their hand's on the slide and their hand is on the cylinder and put a round down range. So I think that's beneficial versus a semi-automatic. There's plenty of semi-automatics where you can still obviously shoot the weapon if someone's holding the slide, but it's just a lower likelihood. Unloading and reloading, I think, is very fast. If you come through, you hit that ejector, you got to make sure you hit that thing good. But actually dumping all the spent shells and reloading, I think, is very functional. It's very deliberate and it's quick, because if you want to quickly just throw 1, 2, 3 rounds in this bad boy, you can throw 3 in here, close it, chamber it, and be putting rounds down range. Versus a semi-automatic, you either need to have another mag completely at the ready, be very good at quickly throwing rounds in a mag, or be good at throwing rounds directly in the slide into the chamber, which I've never been good at that. So if you're a cowboy like that, or if you're John Wick like that, maybe that's something that you can do. I think that the fact that rounds are cheap, 38 special rounds are very affordable. 357, if you want to run that, those are affordable. And as long as it's a quality round, you can almost run anything through a revolver. Some semi-automatics are super particular, super special. The most common round for a semi-automatic is a 9mm, whereas revolvers are 357s and 38s are the most common. I mean, more stopping power, obviously, coming from a revolver when you're comparing the two. Also, semi-automatics are very, very sensitive. If you have a 9mm and you run a 10mm round through it, which are hard to find, but let's just say you ran a 10mm round through it, your weapon's probably going to blow up. It's probably going to misfire in your hand. Whereas a revolver is a lot more forgiving. You still can get that type of catastrophic failure in a revolver, but it's not as likely as a semi-automatic. So we'll talk about some overall cons with it. You do need to get good at long distance double action pulls if you're going to rock a revolver that is hammerless like I have here. If you have a target that's farther away, you have to get used to that double action pull because you don't have the reliance of going single action and a double only. If you have a double single, then you can practice and get used to that. That's one con. I'm used to it because I send rounds down range, but you may not be used to it. Another thing is specifically, a lot of revolvers are hard to get red dots and weapon lights on them. I don't know how the hell you would ever get a weapons light on a 2-inch barrel revolver. A 6-inch barrel revolver, if you're willing to spend the money with some tape and some, you could probably make it happen. Same thing with red dots on those. But I don't have any issue with carrying a light in the weak side hand if I want to actually run a light with a revolver. You know, that's just something I think about. And as for running a red dot, I'm okay with iron sights. But everybody's a little bit different. If that's something that's important to you, then you need to either be willing to spend the money, either be willing to carry a larger revolver or not carry at all. Another limitation is obviously it's 5, 6, or up to 8 shots. It can take longer to fully reload. And at the end of the day, it has less shots than most semi-automatics. So if there's a target that you need to put a lot of rounds down range, you are limited by what is in the actual weapon, how fast you can reload it. Even if you have the speed loaders that you can throw in there and all that type of stuff, you got to remember to bring those with you. Those are big. It's a lot of things you have to think about. And according to the CDC, most shooting incidents involve less than 5 rounds. So even if you're carrying a semi-automatic with your red dots and your sights and your weapons and your lights, and there's a very low likelihood that you're going to be reloading. It is probably a super low likelihood that you're going to fire more than 3 to 5 rounds. That's why I feel more comfortable with having the stopping power of a revolver versus having the quick access to multiple rounds of a semi-automatic. But what do you think? Are revolvers obsolete? Do you think that they make no sense whatsoever to carry? I like to rock them specifically for myself. When it comes to my everyday carry, everybody's a little bit different. You can do whatever you see fit. But I have oftentimes carried a 380 in the past, and I'll probably do a video about why a semi-automatic might make sense for CCW. But if this is your first time stopping by, hit the subscribe button. I would love to have you a part of the battalion. If this is not your first time stopping by, well, thank you once again for watching me run my grade. For everyone else, we'll speak soon.